July 7, 1944. Standardführer Kurt Panzer Meyer stood atop the stone tower of Ardennes Abbey, staring out over the hedgerows north of Caen. The countryside looked calm in the fading light. Too calm. Thick green walls of bocage cut the land into tight compartments, every field a fortress, every lane a killing ground. At 33, Meyer was the youngest divisional commander in the German army. Ambitious, brilliant, absolutely convinced he had solved the problem of the invasion. His 12th SS Panzer Division waited inland, positioned 15 miles from the coast, far beyond the reach of naval gunfire, far beyond the chaos of the beaches. According to every artillery table ever printed, no ship afloat could touch him here. He commanded nearly 20,000 men, most of them barely 18. Boys raised under the regime, drilled relentlessly, fed ideology and aggression in equal measure. They were fanatical, obedient, terrifyingly confident, and they were armed to the teeth. More than 150 tanks, including Panthers and Tigers, the heaviest armor in Europe. Steel beasts capable of killing any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. Their thick glacis plates shrugged off most shells. Their long-barreled guns dominated open ground. The terrain favored him completely. The bocage of Normandy was ancient. Dense hedgerows sat atop earthen walls reinforced by roots thicker than a man's arm. Stone fences, sunken roads, narrow lanes. For an attacker, it was a nightmare. For a defender, it was paradise. Meyer had studied his maps, consulted his artillery officers, questioned naval experts. British naval guns, they told him, had a maximum effective range of 12 miles. At 15 miles inland, he was untouchable. According to doctrine, according to physics, according to the laws of war themselves, Meyer planned to ambush the British advance, smash their armor, and hurl them back toward the beaches. Another victory. Another line on his Knight's Cross record. He believed the laws of physics protected him. He did not know the enemy had learned how to bend them. Within 24 hours, his elite division would be shattered. Not by tanks, not by infantry, but by a force that should never have been able to reach him. A force already waiting beyond the horizon. The 12th SS Panzer Division was not a normal unit. It was a political statement forged in steel. Its soldiers were barely out of school, hardened by propaganda and relentless training. Fearless to the point of recklessness, they believed in victory because they had been taught there was no alternative. Their equipment, however, was very real. Panther WWII tanks, Tiger I heavies, over-engineered, expensive, deadly. For weeks, they had held the line around Sekshiki-Sunkin. British armor and infantry had attacked again and again, and every time, the division threw them back. To German high command, this was proof. Proof that elite units and superior equipment could still stop the Allied tide. But the British faced a problem. The bocage made maneuver nearly impossible. Tanks were forced into narrow lanes. Infantry assaults dissolved under machine gun fire. British 25-pounder field guns were effective against troops in the open, but against dug-in Panthers, they were useless. Shells bounced off armor or detonated harmlessly in the hedgerows. Meyer understood this perfectly. It was the cornerstone of his defense. He deployed his tanks in depth, hidden in barns, masked behind stone walls, concealed in sunken roads. He intended to let the enemy come close, then annihilate them. He was gambling on a single assumption, that the Allies had no weapon capable of striking a point target 15 miles inland with enough force to crack a Tiger tank. On the evening of July the 7th, the front fell quiet. Meyer checked his watch. He wrote confidently in his diary. The British attack, when it came, would be broken by his anti-tank screen. Surrounded by thick stone walls, he slept soundly. He felt invincible. What Meyer did not know was that Operation Charnwood had already been authorized. The planners were not interested in flanking him. They intended to crush him. From the sea, they had called in the HMS Rodney. The Rodney was an odd ship. Built in the 1920s, she looked unbalanced, almost ugly to traditional sailors. All 9 of her 16-inch guns were mounted forward of the bridge, clustered like a clenched fist. But those guns carried power no tank commander could comprehend. Each barrel was 60 feet long. Each shell weighed over a ton. These were not weapons in the Army sense. They were instruments of geological violence. When they fired, the air itself compressed. Windows shattered miles away. The deck trembled like a living thing. Inside Ardennes Abbey, Meyer reviewed intelligence with his operations officer. "The naval fire has ceased, sir," the officer said, pointing to the map. "They lack the range to support an inland push." Meyer nodded. He trusted the specifications. Inside Ardennes Abbey, Meyer reviewed intelligence with his operations officer. "The naval fire has ceased, sir," the officer said, pointing to the map. "They lack the range to support an inland push." Meyer nodded. He trusted the specifications. Naval guns fired on flat trajectories. To hit him at 15 miles would require an impossible elevation. But the crew of the Rodney knew a trick that wasn't in the manuals. The captain ordered the ballast tanks on one side of the ship flooded. Slowly, deliberately, the massive battleship began to list. The deck tilted. The elevation angle of the guns increased, just a few degrees. Those few degrees added miles to the range. It was crude, industrial, brilliant. Deep inside the ship, the Admiralty fire control table, a mechanical computer the size of a room, recalculated everything. Wind speed, Earth's rotation, air density, propellant temperature. The math adjusted. The firing solution locked. Kurt Meyer believed physics protected him. He was wrong. He was only waiting for the calculation to finish. Dawn broke on July 8th with a low, rolling tremor. The sky filled with aircraft. 450 heavy bombers appeared over Caen. The carpet bombing began. Explosions walked across the city. Buildings vanished. Streets collapsed. The noise was apocalyptic. The young soldiers of the 12th SS huddled in foxholes, hands over ears, praying for it to end. Meyer was a veteran. When the bombers departed and the dust settled, he emerged to assess the damage. The city burned, but his tanks were intact. The bombs had missed the hardened positions. He rallied his men. "Get to the guns!" he shouted. "They will come now." British infantry advanced. Meyer's tanks opened fire. The familiar rhythm returned. 88mm guns cracked. Machine guns rattled. Shermans burned in the fields. For a moment, Meyer felt in control again. His defensive screen was holding. He watched a young Oberfuhrer, 19 years old, reload an 88 with mechanical precision. This was German training. This was discipline. Meyer radioed his battalion commanders. "Hold positions. Let them come to us." He had seen this before. In Russia, in France. The enemy attacks, loses tanks, withdraws. Then the radio operator aboard the HMS Rodney received the coordinates. Target, concentration of armor. Grid square, 4492. The code word was given. The ship shuddered violently as the first salvo erupted. The guns roared. On deck, crews reloaded in silence, shells hoisted by electric winches, propellant charges positioned with ritual precision. By the time the first shells were airborne, the second salvo was already loading. This was industrial warfare. No speeches, no heroics, just process. It took roughly 60 seconds for the shells to travel the 20-mile distance. They climbed into the stratosphere, into thin, freezing air. For a moment, they hung in silence. 3 massive steel cylinders suspended against the blue sky. Below them, life continued. A German loader struggled with a tin of meat. A radio operator adjusted his headset. Kurt Meyer wiped dust from his binocular lenses. They heard nothing. The shells were traveling faster than sound. The sound of the guns had been left behind miles ago. Death was coming silently. No whistle, no warning scream. Just wind in the trees. Gravity took over. The shells screamed downward at twice the speed of sound. Perhaps Meyer saw a flash. Perhaps he felt the pressure change. Or perhaps, for 1 second, he wondered why the birds had stopped singing. Then the world ended. The first shells landed near the village of Saint-Contest. Meyer was thrown against the wall of his command post. The ground didn't just shake, it rippled. Outside, a 45-ton Panther was lifted into the air and flipped onto its turret like a toy. The blast wave turned air into a weapon. Soldiers died without shrapnel, organs liquefied by pressure alone. Meyer ran to a window. He expected tanks. He saw nothing. No muzzle flashes. No smoke. Only the earth erupting in geysers of fire and black soil. "Where is it coming from?" his adjutant screamed. Meyer had no answer. The shells fell steeply, negating all cover. Stone walls became shrapnel. Barns collapsed instantly. Panic spread through the Hitler youth ranks. They were trained to fight tanks, trained to fight men. They could not fight math. A young Unterführer stumbled past Meyer, ears bleeding, eyes vacant. "The sky is falling," he whispered. Meyer let him go. There was nothing to say. The radio crackled. "Command, we are taking fire from unknown position. Request air support." "Where is the Luftwaffe?" Meyer knew the answers. The Luftwaffe was gone. His artillery couldn't counter-battery a ship beyond the horizon. He was alone. All day, the Rodney continued. Target called. Adjustment made. Guns fired. 60 seconds later, a strong point ceased to exist. Meyer ordered a counterattack. Instinct took over. "Advance! Close! With the enemy!" He hoped proximity would stop the bombardment. It didn't. Forward observers walked the fire with surgical precision. A Panther advancing down a lane took a direct hit. The turret, 12 tons of steel, was blown 30 meters away. The crew never screamed. This was not war. This was demolition. Roads vanished into craters 40 feet wide. Supply trucks vaporized. Communications collapsed. Standing beside a crater that had once been a crossroads, Meyer understood. He wasn't losing tactically. He was losing economically. Each Panther took months to build. Each shell cost a fraction of that. The Allies could fire thousands. Germany could not replace one. Diamonds traded for stones. By evening, the WWII SS Panzer Division was finished. Not outmaneuvered. Dismantled. Meyer withdrew what remained. Years later, as a prisoner, he asked American officers about the bombardment. They shrugged. "Standard fire mission," one said. "You were just coordinates. Coordinates on a map." That was the future of war. Factories, math, indifference. On July 8, 1944, Kurt Meyer learned the truth. Courage cannot stop a one-ton shell. Tactics cannot defeat physics. The era of the warrior was over. The era of firepower had begun.